poor bashing. I first learned a lot about poor bashing through a book called Poor Bashing, The Politics of Exclusion by Gene Swanson, published in 2001. We had a copy here. We had a library of books that were donated for our members' reading edification. They all disappeared right away. And you could interpret that in a lot of ways, right? But what I prefer to think is that our members are so zealous and so intense in their studies that they just can't let go once they get started. But it's a wonderful book, and I recommend it to everybody. Jean Swanson, she's an activist out in British Columbia. And she speaks about poor bashing, and I quote, as the special language of poor bashing disguises real causes of poverty, hurts and excludes people who are poor, cheapens the labor of people who have jobs, and takes the pressure off the rich. Yes, because if you blame the poor for their situation, the rich don't have to answer for it. I looked up the term bashing and went to Wikipedia, my first source for all information. And you know, I'm not even a Gen X or a millennial, the people that are so at home on the internet. I'm actually an old baby boomer, but I still go to Wikipedia, and it defines bashing, not specifically poor bashing, but bashing as a harsh, gratuitous, prejudicial attack on a person, or group, or subject, normally motivated by bigotry. How many people have experienced what they would call poor bashing, by the way? I know I certainly have. And honestly, although I tried to make light of it, we were terribly poor, and I still remember to this day, 40 some odd years later, a high school teacher who's supposed to teach history, but didn't teach history much, but he spent a lot of time having ad hoc classes on those lousy welfare bums. I remember him saying once that if he was going to pay for those welfare moms to have kids, he should be sleeping with them too. This was a high school teacher, and believe it, back then there was a lot more deference given to people in positions of authority, so I just sat at my desk and hunched away and pretended that I wasn't there. But you can imagine the pain and the anger that is inflicted on someone, especially at a young age, having to listen to this stuff when they're poor through no fault of their own. Poor bashing is a form of victim blaming, and I found a great quote from someone named Marika Morris, whom I don't know, but she said, poor bashing erodes the spirit just as malnutrition erodes the body. And that is so true. I did want to mention quickly, Mike Baldwin would put food in the budget. Do people know about him? Our members do, but probably some other people don't. He's a great advocate for social justice. And he has written a column in The Spectator, an op-ed, or an opinion piece, Wednesday, September 16th. I do recommend it to everybody. It's called Food Banks, Band-Aids for the Hungry. And he mentions in there about touring through food banks in the north and how one of the attendants at a food bank said, you know, we got to be careful because we get a lot of scammers coming in for food. And Mike asked, why do you call them scammers? Why do you blame them? Why don't you blame the system that's not providing enough food for people to eat? And that is really a profound and very important question. And one that's not asked nearly enough. And I ask everybody, if you hear poor bashing, then speak up and say, you know, as I would now, that, hey, I don't want to hear that, man. We have to stand up for ourselves. Yes. Well, it's not question time, but okay. Well, can you save it for later, Odette? Our first responsibility here is to our people. Okay, rather than me yap any longer, I mean, I do love attention, but we have very important speakers here. We have John Clark, who's a legend in the anti-poverty field. I won't call it a business, I almost did. Everybody know John and have heard of him? He's been in the newspaper since I was a university student anyway, staging constant actions against the system, all within the law, right, John? Okay. John gave a brief bio here, very brief. He says he became involved in anti-poverty organizing in London, Ontario in the 1980s when he helped to form the Union of Unemployed Workers. In, I guess, 1990, he moved to Toronto to become an organizer. With the newly formed Ontario Coalition Against Poverty, or OCAP, and has been with the organization ever since. Very brief and to the point, John, thank you. Our next guest speaker is Celeste Licorice, whom I know through the Roundtable and the Speak Now organization, which is a group that goes out and speaks about poverty. I was learning to speak, so I'm consigned to speaking here, and I'm trying my best to prove her wrong. Anyway, Celeste Licorice bio. Celeste is a single mom with multiple passions, especially making Hamilton a better place for those struggling with poverty. Originally from Toronto, she moved to Hamilton to attend McMaster University and has called Hamilton home ever since. Her diverse background includes public relations, marketing, and carpentry, but she has found her calling in creating and coordinating Speak Now Hamilton Speakers Bureau for the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction. Celeste holds a BA in philosophy from McMaster University, is a member of the McMaster Research Ethics Board, and a positive community thought leader for the Tamarack Institute. Her passion for helping those in need shift attitudes in others while discovering themselves through stories has made her a sought-after speaker and presenter in Ontario and the U.S. Celeste believes the words of John Quincy Adams, wow, I think an American president or founding father, who says, if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, or become more, you are a leader. When she's not organizing Speak Now, she's busy with her 3 daughters in the Sherman neighborhood in East Hamilton. And Elizabeth, do we have a bio for speaker number 3? Can you introduce her, please? Oh, no, go ahead. She's a legend. We didn't get a bio from her, so.
Okay, well, I guess I've been organizing for about 30 years. I'm a single parent as well. I have raised 5 children, 4 of my own. And largely in downtown east side of Toronto, in St. Jamestown neighborhood, which is the most diverse community in the world. So I work with a lot of new Canadians as well as what we might remember as Harper's Stock Canadians. Anyway, I've done a lot of international stuff. I've been involved in anti-globalization movements. I was a member of the National Anti-Poverty Organization before it became Canada Poverty. And I am now working on food security and food direct solutions in the community. I'm also on disability. And I'm still a social housing tenant on community housing. A lot of struggles with them. Actually. Yeah, so I was here in 2003 when this organization started.
with that, I guess I'll ask John, you're starting. John Clark, whom I've always called Ontario's answer to Malcolm X.
The problem with being introduced as Ontario's answer to Malcolm X is you can only fail. But, so I asked to speak about core bashing, and that's sort of an interesting thing to be asked to talk about, because it begs a whole series of questions. Usually when I'm asked to speak, I'm asked to talk about the things that OCAP is doing, the occupation, protest, or whatever. But this sort of is a bit of an invitation to be an amateur philosopher. So I can indulge myself a little bit. When it comes to what is labelled core bashing, I think it's necessary to recognise that it is a really deeply ingrained aspect of this society. It isn't just that some people have some negative ideas, it's something much more than that. It's very pervasive in general society, and anybody who lives in poverty, especially anybody who was raised in poverty, will immediately understand the concept. When OCAP got started, a long time ago now, back in the early 1990s, I remember that a documentary had been made about life on welfare, as it was called, across the country. And one of the filmmakers, now a highly successful documentary maker, quite well off and elevated into the professional middle class, but had been raised on social assistance in the city of Ottawa. And there was this big swanky kick-off for the documentary. And she just told the story, remembering how as a child she'd gone into the Rideau Centre in Ottawa. And at the time they'd issued these vouchers from social services that you could redeem in the store. And so she handed one of these in, and the cashier took it and yelled across to another cashier, "Is this one of these welfare things?" And as she told the story, she broke down and cried. And it's sort of the humiliation that lived with her all those years. So, I mean, that sort of, I think, reflects how deeply ingrained the prejudice is. And it is pervasive. I just a while ago on the net happened to catch one of these dreadful social experiment things that people do. But it showed a man in Stockholm, Sweden, a relatively affluent and liberal society, who tries an experiment where he dresses up in an evening wear, a tuxedo and everything, looking very affluent, and gets on a bus and says, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I forgot my wallet. Do you mind if I get on and not pay?" And he tries it about 12 times, and every time he says, "Oh yes, no problem, please, yes, like that." And then he goes home, changes into sort of ragged clothes and grabs some garbage bags and tries the same thing. And he's immediately told by the same bus driver, "What do you mean? You ask for free groceries? You can't come on. That's the rule. Get off." Like that, every single time. So, I mean, the prejudices are very, very deeply ingrained. But the question I'd like to get into is, what exactly is prejudice? How did it arise? And what's the function it plays in society? Within this, you've got this unaccountable, ugly prejudice floating around for some strange reason. It's actually there, and it's part of the social fabric. And to do that, to do justice to the subject, you have to go back into history. Henry Ford, who of course was a big capitalist, once said that history is bunk. And you can understand why Henry Ford and people like him don't want people to look at history. But history is actually very important. And we can't understand poor bashing and all its ramifications unless you understand how it actually arose. And to look at how it arose, you go back to the country where there was first a capitalist system put in place, which happens to be a country I come from, England. And in the 14, 1500s, you start to get a process emerging where the peasants, who all own their own little plots of land and work for the lord of the manor and everything, are thrown off the land and are turned into a modern workforce. Right? So they expel the peasants from the land. They drive them off by a sort through a legalised process of theft and murder. And then they make people homeless and jobless and landless. And people have to find some way to survive. And people have to look for work and go to work for employers in a modern working class sense. But of course, there's a lot more people looking for work than they can actually deal with. So you get a whole population of people who become desperate and who become angry, and you've got people trying to survive. And in those early years, they referred to the unemployed population as vagabonds. And so you've got this population of vagabonds roaming the countryside, looking for work, looking for ways to survive, and sometimes breaking the law to survive. And in those days, they couldn't, send the OPP down the 401 in an SUV. If there was problems, it was very difficult for them to mobilise large numbers of state officials and what have you to deal with these situations. So they had a real problem. They had a problem of lawlessness, restlessness, and people banding together to try to survive. So they made the reluctant decision that what they would have to do is provide some level of provision for people's needs. And so they came up with a system that they called the poor laws. I'm sure many people have heard that term, the poor laws. And what the poor laws were was an attempt to provide a grudging minimum so people could survive, just about, not quite. But in return, make sure that people were pacified. So they were very, very anxious that the system not be at all generous. They didn't want people to get the idea that the poor laws was better than low-paid work. So they made the centrepiece of it something called the workhouse. And the idea was that if you were going to receive relief, you would have to go into the workhouse, where you would have to wear this rough uniform, where you need the worst possible food, and where you'd be subjected to the terrible, terrible treatment. And people rebelled against that system. And so they deliberately wanted the whole thing to be as wretched and degrading and stigmatising as it possibly could be. And they deliberately wanted the people who were forced into the workhouse to be regarded as pariahs, as untouchables, as people who were of very, very low social status. And the whole concept of poor bashing, of the undeserving poor, of the morally judged, morally fixed poor, really comes out of that whole period. And that's what it was all about. And in 1834, they put together a commission. They came up with a reform commission that studied the question of how poor relief should be administered. And they developed a principle that some people give away of less eligibility. And the concept of less eligibility was an important one because it lives today. The concept of less eligibility was that they would provide a level of relief to people who were unemployed and poor and destitute. But first of all, the level they provided they would attempt to keep it below the lowest possible wage that was received in the worst exploitative jobs that were on offer. And the second thing is that it would be as the form of providing relief would be as degrading, as insulting, as humiliating as it possibly could be. There was an assistant poor law commissioner in the county of Kent in England by the name of Francis Bond Head, and he wrote an essay called English Charity, and he said in his essay, less eligibility must be strictly enforced, and our workhouses must be repulsive institutions. And he's an interesting man from our point of view here, because the year after he wrote that essay, he became the Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada, which is now Ontario. And the year after he set up a shop here, the Toronto House of Industry, the first workhouse in the province, opened its doors. So I would certainly argue that the poor laws represent the ancestor of the present social assistance system in so many ways. When people are on social assistance, they often say, "Why are they like this? It's like it's their money they're giving away. Why are they treating us this way?" But what has survived from the poor laws is the concept of what two American writers, Francis Fox Piven and Richard A. Cloud, described as rituals of degradation. They're very much still built into the system. And the truth is that today, in this particular period, in 2015, we're looking at a situation where this whole process is being intensified. They're making it worse because of the need to create, because of the whole austerity agenda that they're putting forward. Because what they want to do is to make the systems of providing for people even less adequate than they've been in the past. They want to create a whole climate of desperation. And attacks on the actual programs is one very important part of it, but the other part is an elevation of what we may precisely call poor bashing. In the UK at the moment, they've introduced, the government there has introduced a whole series of dreadful measures. One of the things where they've become trailblazers in terms of social retrogression is an attack on disability benefits. It's gone further in the UK than it has here yet. And the creation of the media-fostered disabled benefit scrounger has become such a major factor that police authorities in the UK are registering a record number of hate crimes directed against disabled people. You have people in wheelchairs being beaten up in supermarkets by people alleging that they're scrounging benefits and that they're cheaters and these kinds of things. And it's reached really dreadful proportions. But the point that has to be understood about the whole process is that it's not just a question of an ugly prejudice floating around. It performs a real function. What they want to do in this climate of austerity is to create a desperate scramble for the lowest paying jobs on offer. They want to be able to drive down wages, and they want workers who have jobs to look at people on social assistance and say, I would accept any conditions, I would work for any wage rather than end up in that situation. Right? That's what it's really all about. And when it comes to, I talked about the roots in the poor laws. In the reign of Elizabeth I, in 1601, when they introduced poor laws, they had a concept of the deserving and the undeserving poor. The notion was that the temporarily unemployed were undeserving, they were lazy, they were not working because they were lazy, but the deserving poor were more disabled people. That's sort of broken down today. The disabled too are being lumped in with the undeserving poor. So it's a relentless and it's a brutal agenda. And the only final point that I'd like to make, because I didn't just want to sort of present this as a tale of irreparable woe that there's nothing we can do about, is that the lesson of history has always been this, I think, is that this is the system that is imposed on us. But the limits of that system has always been pushed back by people resisting and by people fighting back. That's why a meeting like this in this community is so precious and so important and so much something to build on and something to take hope from. The lesson of history is that they will go as far as they can to the extent that the poor suffer in silence. When people organise and fight back, there are real differences to be made. And one final example that just sort of leaps out at me in our own work in OCAP in Toronto is the situation there. There's certainly rampant homelessness here in Hamilton as well, but because of the size of Toronto and the fact that so many people go to that city, there's such an enormous concentration of homelessness in the downtown. And they've been abandoning people on an enormous scale. Shelters are hopelessly overcrowded. They're pushing the shelters out to the fringes of the city. And in January of this year, 4 homeless men died in the space of a week. One of them froze to death in a bus shelter at the corner of Yonge and Dundas, which is the busiest intersection in the whole of the city and indeed in the whole of the country. The busiest and has the highest volume of people. So this last week, we marched on Monday, we marched a good crowd of people to that intersection at Yonge and Dundas, and we treated it as a memorial to the man who died and to all the others. And we shut down the busiest intersection in the country. And because the man died, nobody knew. But on Monday, everybody knew. They had no choice to know because their business, their commerce, everything was shut down for an extended period of time. So that's the message. That's what poor bashing is. It's a virulent weapon that's being used against us. But the antidote to poor bashing is not to accept it, to organise, to challenge, to face it down, and to build movements of resistance. Thanks very much.
And I do want to recommend a book that one of our members told me about, Terry. It's called People of the Abyss. It's by Jack London, the author of Call of the Wild and so on. He spent some time on the streets of East London around 1901, and he describes very well the horrors of the workhouses that John was talking about. And I swear everybody should read that. You wouldn't even believe the things that were inflicted on people, and that I'm sure the powers that be would love to bring back again if we don't resist that. Okay, so that's...
Thank you. Wow. Can you guys hear me? We're talking about poor bashing. It's a difficult thing for me to talk about, and partly because it's a personal thing, having experienced it, and part of it is because for a long time, even being poor bashed, I didn't recognize that I was. I didn't realize what was going on. I've experienced discrimination and things because of the color of my skin and my hair and whatever else. But as was mentioned in the introduction, I'm a single mom raising 3 kids on my own, and the 4 of us have lived in poverty for a while. I've been on employment insurance, and I've been on Ontario Works, and it's only within the last year that I'm not on Ontario Works anymore. But during that time, and it's been a couple of times in my life when I've been on Ontario Works, I've really experienced what poor bashing is. But not all at once. So for example, going to the food bank and having them tell you, well, you're only allowed to come here once a month. And having to recognize that for me and my kids, once a month was not going to be enough. And then finding other food banks in the city. And I actually had a schedule. So I knew that I could go to this one once a month, I could go to this one every 2 weeks. Sometimes I would get together with friends and actually go to food banks that were outside my zone, because I also experienced going to a bank and saying, well, I need some diapers and stuff for my kids. And they're like, well, where do you live? Well, we don't help people that don't live within this boundary. And it's like, but somebody can give me this address. So here I am, humiliated, hungry, without these, having to leave, but not recognizing at the time, and it was only thanks to David Gelman and reading the book Poor Bashing that I realized that this type of treatment of individuals goes on. Because what would tend to happen for me is that I would blame myself. Well, I should have looked that up. I should have known better. I should have figured out that, I'm the one that brought this circumstance on myself. So who am I to question? Right? I'm really proud to be here today with a group who recognizes that this is an important issue that we need to face and address together. Because for every one of you here, there are 10 or 12 or 100 more outside that are probably standing at the wrong food bank right now, or fighting with the form that they're trying to fill out and having someone tell them that they're at the wrong office on the wrong day with the wrong information, and trying to figure out how to make ends meet. I don't have a long social justice history, because I've only started working for the Round Table in the past 2 years. So it's nice to sit with people who have a history of working to try to change things. But it's also sad because it means that this has existed for a hell of a long time. A hell of a lot of work has happened, and we're still fighting, still struggling to make things work. Society has a long way to go. By having all of these systems that allow people to be demoralized, depressed, and not to live to our fullest potential is deplorable. I work for the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction, and it puts me in an interesting position because our work is to work to make changes at the systemic level. So talking about income security, talking about shifting attitudes, things like that that are going to change on a systems level. But I work for the Speakers Bureau, so I help people tell their stories of personal experiences of poverty and marginalization. And there's a huge gap between what it means to live, like the stories I just told you about living day to day, trying to figure out how you're going to fix your broken roof, and to fight to make changes so that no one has to live on, what is it for a single person, 600 and change a month, when rents in the city are going astronomically through the roof, when buildings are being bought, people are being turfed out, and buildings are being redeveloped and rented out and sold, so that people who have lots and lots of money can come in and live there. Where's the justice there? Right now, housing is a huge problem. I think the wait list is 5,000 people, families long, for affordable housing in Hamilton. And then you add to that people who are already housed, but inadequately housed, who are facing problems with bed bugs, who are facing problems with leaks and with mold, and whose health is deteriorating. It's violence against us. One of our speakers says, you know, it's a form of violence, and I've heard even some of our city councilors talk about this. And when I think about Fort Bashing, part of my struggle is that it makes me want to cry and scream, because it's like, how can this possibly exist in 2015? How can we still have to be having these discussions, having these arguments, having these fights? And to have the courage to stare it down, like you're saying, and say, all right, together, maybe we can make a difference to how things change. So part of my point was to say, sometimes when we live in poverty, we can get used to poor bashing. We can get used to being talked down to not being listened to saying it's my fault. But where do we find the courage collectively to stand up and say, hey, that's not right, I need something to change. And that's why what we're doing, what we're talking about today, is so important. And I say this especially for my kids. So my kids have primarily grown up in poverty. I grew up sort of low to middle class in Toronto, but my kids are growing up in poverty. And they're acutely aware when they go to school that they don't always have the right clothes, that they don't always have lunches. And part of their education is accepting that we're poor. They're horribly embarrassed by the fact that I work in anti-poverty work, and that I'll tell stories about what it's like for us to live in poverty. Because for them, it's like when you describe holding out that ticket that says, hey, we're a welfare family. But on the other hand, I need them to understand that it's not their fault. It's not my fault. For the first few years of their lives, until I started doing some of this work, that's how we lived. Well, if I could get a better job, and they would look at me and say, well, Mommy, why don't you just go and get a better job? Well, anybody who knows that if you're a woman of color, even with a university education in this society, which poor bashing is one form of discrimination, but there are tons of others that dictate why I, at 50-some-odd years old, finally now have a contract job that has some benefits attached to it. How does that happen for an intelligent person like me? Right? How does that happen? So part of this for me is to make sure that my kids, and that all of our kids, any young people that are coming up, don't have to endure a system where they suffer, where they aren't able to realize their full potential, where when they go to school, they don't think, well, I'm poor, so I don't deserve to learn. Which I'm telling you right now is what's happening in classrooms across, especially in the lower city. There is a direct association with how your parents are doing, the house you live in, the clothes you're wearing, and how you perceive that you're going to be able to do in the future. If we don't get ahead of the stigma that poor bashing puts on us, and we're looking at, I mean, I don't even know how many generations we've already suffered through, but we're looking at a future of this. And when we talk about the jobs, it's like musical chairs, fewer and fewer worse jobs that more and more of us have to struggle and fight for. And when does that cycle end? And who's looking at that? Part of what I do in my work to try to elevate, and it's very limited what I can do as an individual, but part of what I try to bring to the process is care, compassion, and dignity to anyone who comes through the doors. And sometimes that means actually pushing back against the helpers, because I think sometimes some of the most dangerous groups are the ones that say they're here to help. And I think some of them are well-meaning and saying that, I want to help because I see that there's a need and I want to do it. But at the same time, it's almost like a power trip thing. So I get to decide how much you get, when you get, how you get it. And you can't say anything about it because I'm doing you a favor, right? So if somebody says, well, I'm a vegan or my kid's allergic to cow's milk and I need soy milk, they're going to look at you like, who are you to even be thinking about organic or soy or anything else? Part of what I did with Speakers Bureau was, this was all people with lived experience, including myself. If you have a food request, make it. If you're a vegan, if you're whatever it is that you want to try it. Some people decide, you know what, I don't like rice, I want potatoes. And I did that because part of what happens is when you get used to being bashed down enough, you don't think that you have the right to ask. And if nobody ever gives you the opportunity to say, tell me what you need, I might not always be able to give you the answer or the thing that you want, at least you know you have the power to try. And so in all of the work that I do, I try to build those things in. So I have kind of a list, and then I'll end, of things that I try to encompass in my work, and that if I send the list to people at OW and to people who are in a position of power where they figure, I'm not going to give you a choice, to let them know that they can. Recognize people's gifts and talents. So everybody in this room, no matter what your socioeconomic status is, you have gifts and talents and things that you're put on this earth to be able to share. Poverty should not be the delimiting factor that prevents you from being who you are. So recognize people's talents and gifts. Acknowledge the whole person, not just their current circumstance. If you walk into a food bank or into a bank, or I've seen that video that you referred to where the guy's all well-dressed. We judge each other so harshly just on superficial appearances, and I'm here to tell you, the guys that are actually wearing those fancy suits and stuff, some of them are way worse off than we are because they actually, in real terms, have less money and more debt. And God forbid that when they go into their workplace and they get that pink slip or whatever, they're screwed. And they have no idea how to manage because they think that they've got it figured out by living beyond their means. We don't have a choice. If I have to hear another person say to me, do you guys ever offer courses on budgeting for low-income people? Because that's what they really need. I'm here to tell you, and you guys probably all know, we are like the experts. If you put us as the people that are running the economy, we'll balance it within 3 weeks. Because we can't spend beyond our needs because we don't have it. Because we have such a broken system, there is huge distrust. So when we do enter into these arrangements where people are supposed to help, I'm already thinking, yeah, they're already looking at me, black woman, single mom with 3 kids, and they're already thinking, and some of them have the nerve to ask, do they all have the same dad? No, seriously. And this is like none of their business, even if they have 6 dads between the 3 of them. Why is that an issue? This is what it comes down to. So it's going to take a lot of work to build trusting relationships with people, and we have to hold our heads up high. We have to push back. We have to say, we deserve choice. We need that. I'll close just by saying what the roundtable is doing in terms of helping change the system. And it's, yeah.
Someone pointed out to me that a lot of people don't know what the roundtable is.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. I didn't. All right, so the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction is a collaborative table of 60 different organizations in the city that are all doing, most of them are doing frontline anti-poverty work. So Wesley Urban Ministries, YWCAs, social assistance work groups, McMaster University. 10 years ago, people got together and said, look, we're never going to lift poverty, we're never even going to put a dent in it unless we're trying to change the systems that are allowing low social assistance rates, unless we're changing the systems that are not allowing people to have affordable housing. So that group has been in existence for 10 years. Their calling cry is to make Hamilton the best place to raise a child. Sadly, we're not even anywhere close to making Hamilton the best place to raise a child. In fact, in my case, they've got another few years, my kids will be grown up, and it will still not have been the best place to raise a child. But they basically work in 3 areas. One is income security, and that is to look at social assistance rates and ODST rates, and to talk with the city, the provincial government, and on a national level to say how can things be changed. The second area they work in, why am I drawing lines on that one? Living wage. So we all know about a minimum wage. There's a strong push towards the living wage, and right now living wage in Hamilton for, I think it's a single person, maybe with 2 kids, is $14.95 an hour. I'm here to tell you right now, for me, $14.95 an hour doesn't even begin to cut it, and I suspect for most people, and as rents and things continue to increase, that number is going to need to be changed. But it's designed to try to encourage employers to at least offer a living wage as opposed to a minimum wage. Because you can work full-time and still not be lifted out of poverty with a full-time minimum wage job. And the third area, which is where my group, Speak Now Hamilton, comes in, is the shifting attitudes work group, which recognizes that unless we work to shift attitudes, sort of all that ingrained poor bashing, I'm better than you because I have a bigger, better car, you're milking the system because you've got 3 kids and shouldn't have any more, all of those attitudes need to be changed, and that's what the shifting attitudes work group works to do. And we do it sort of on 2 fronts right now. One is through Speakers Bureau, and the other is through an income disparity resource tool that's aimed at grade 9 civics and grade 10 religious studies children in the Catholic and public school systems to help start getting young people to think about social justice issues so that at least in their minds it begins to shift from those archaic attitudes towards people living in poverty. So, on the 19th, everybody's going to do what?
Vote.
Because there's some things at a national level.
Do not vote.
Housing, healthcare, pharmacare, and income security. Those are things that at a national level, if we don't have programs to look at those things, we still remain screwed. So as kind and as generous and whatever people are doing in your cities, if there's no national structure behind it, we're still not going to get ahead. They're just trying to make do with what is. So I'll close with that, and thank you very much for having me.
We're asking just hold the questions until after Josephine Gray is finished speaking, and then we can do them all together. I did want to mention in connection with food banks and food donations, the campaign did a video a couple of years ago in conjunction with Kathleen Quinn, who was at the alternative news site, Operation Maple. It's on YouTube. It's only about 4 or 5 minutes long, and it's called A Meal Hard to Digest. It shows some of the crap that was donated to poor people in boxes a couple of years ago. I might point out that I'm one of the stars in the video, so please, go, no, honestly, go see it. It's on YouTube, A Meal Hard to Digest. It's well worth it. Now, okay, Josephine Gray, lift us, please.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, we did choose low-income families together because the acronym was lit. And we were single parents who founded it because we wanted to have our own voice in addressing social assistance reform that was happening at the time at the provincial level. And I want to emphasize that what Sister Celeste was talking about in terms of her experience, you know, I'm painfully aware that I, as a single parent, was a bit more privileged and benefiting just ahead of the curve before Harris. So I was able to get social housing. I still had to pay a high price in terms of dignity and being looked down on and being talked down to and this and that. But I do have to say that at the time, you know, because people had thought quarterbacking, because people like John and others had raised awareness for a period of time, it was a period of time where at least there was an almost livable level of social programs. And they were starting to recognize and address the fact that the discrimination was unproductive, was not constructive, was not helping us to have a healthier society. I mean, the dialogue was out there. There was public dialogue about that, as they were talking about reforming social assistance. But even then, the quarterbacking was so ingrained that they were talking about it without us. You know, and it's something that Lyft fought very hard, was to have a seat at the table, to have a voice in the process. Because what we were saying was, all the helpers and government folks, you know, they may finally have decided that things should improve a little bit for this, you know, at this moment,
but they're still not talking to us. So they're the experts on, they consider themselves the experts on how best to help us to become more like them and join society, etc. You know, which was, it was a very weird kind of dynamic. So we sort of fought our way into the room and basically said, look, first of all, you can't reform a system that you don't understand. You don't live it, you don't understand it. Just because this is what the system says on paper, that's not how it actually works out when you're on the ground at the other side of that desk, right? We also, however, as we got into that process, realized that there were people on the delivery end of the system who didn't necessarily enjoy it either. You know, people went into doing social service work. They didn't usually go into it so that they could pick on people and make them feel bad and deny them things. You know, that wasn't the reason they went there. So we sort of took an approach that, if you look at a human rights approach to this, people on both sides of the desk should have a better experience when dealing with these kinds of programs and social services. So we were amongst, you know, a very large movement that was trying to get improvements in the existing structure. And at that time, that's all we could see to do because the existing structure still had a lot of credibility. You know, there was a majority of people in Canadian society had, you know, some decent adequate standard of living, and there weren't that many people in Canadian society who were drowning in debt, who were chronically insecure, etc. So we were basically tinkering with the system as it existed, and we had some success. And the fact that we were there at the table made a difference. It really did make a difference. And I mention this because 20-something years later, as they talk again about reforming the socialist system, you know, this time they did have a bit more of the people at the table, but what they're doing now is tinkering with a system that's so fully broken that fixing it in little ways is only going to do exactly that, fix it in tiny little ways. So if they add $5 a month to our disability checks, it's not going to do very much. We'll say, oh, it's a victory, and they'll tell us, now go home, you've had your little, you know, you've had your little success, be happy. But we know it's not going to do it. We know that, you know, the cost of living has increased 3-4 times over. Wages have stayed stagnant or dropped. Our income benefits have stayed stagnant or dropped. But furthermore, our whole economic system is not only destroying the human population that it exploits, and I mean from the bottom to the top. Because even people who are making a lot of money, they don't have any time. They're all in debt, and they have no time. Like, is it so great to be working 80 hours a week so that you can have a nice house when you can spend 10 minutes in it awake? When you can't talk to your children for like more than like 3 or 4 times a year? When the school system processes children so that they have to do homework all evening? Like, I don't know, I raised my kids at a time when that wasn't the case. Now I see my partner's children. I can't believe it. He has maybe 3 or 4 hours a week where he can actually communicate with his children. So they have deprived families of their right to have a family. And by doing this thing that they do to everybody's time, they've deprived society of the right to figure out how to get out of a mess, which has now become so entrenched. Well, it's broken. It's totally broken. I think we all know that, right? I think at this point, you know, having been somebody who, you know, benefited from some of the changes that we fought for at the time. For example, we made it possible for single parents to work and collect benefits, which, believe me, was a huge improvement. At the time when we got into this, if you tried to go and get a job and your job was shitty and had no benefits, you and your kids lost a lot because you no longer had access to the drug card, to all sorts of different programs that you as a poor person had access to. So you actually lost more than you gained by going to work. So we fought that, we changed it. We fought things around daycare. For example, women in shelters had no daycare, no child support. So here you are trying to get away from your husband. Well, good luck trying to build a life when you've got no one to help you with your kids. So we managed to get these little changes. But then, of course, Harris got elected. And that was the end of everything, basically. That was the end of all the progress that all the progressive movements had ever fought for. He stripped this province within a month or two of everything that we had. And it's important to note, and this is something I love to talk to young people about, how is it my parents' generation could work one job, own a home, and a car, and have vacations? A generation later, 2 parents working a job could maybe own a home, maybe keep a car, maybe have vacations. Now my daughter's generation, 2 parents can work themselves to death and get nowhere and have to go to a food bank. This is intergenerational inequity of the worst kind, right? So I want us to remember, and some of us are old enough to remember, the pre-1970s. Now, once upon a time, this country, no word of a lie, had its own bank, its own public bank, and public money was in public hands. Once upon a time in this country, we had poverty, but it was very small. Now we have poverty, and it is very huge. And we pretend it's not, but it is huge, and we know it. Those of us who live it know it. They're still hiding it, but it's huge. Let's face it, right? Once upon a time, that bank made a huge difference in terms of what the government could do. Because if you recall, back in the day, we didn't hear arguments. We definitely had the poor laws and the poor bashing and all of that, so that the capitalists could get their cheap labor. That was there, yes, absolutely. But at the same time, we had a government that could decide, okay, we're going to build the St. Lawrence Seaway, we're going to build a railway, we're going to build a hospital, we're going to build a university, and public money paid for that. And they never said, oh, well, excuse me, we owe the bank money for the deficit, so you can't have anything. You can't have more benefits. You can't have better housing, because we owe the bank. Now, excuse me, to me, this is the biggest fraud Ponzi scheme ever perpetrated upon humanity, and this is something we have to fight. Now, I raise it because, as John said so eloquently and so truthfully, poor bashing has been a long-term tool of the corporate elite in order to keep society fully divided. So is racism. So is sexism. If we keep couples apart, they won't band together and fight back. If we keep families divided between the old and the young, they won't pass on memories like the fact that we used to have our own bank, like the fact that we used to be able to support a family on a regular job. If they keep us all divided and our time all colonized, we'll be all in our little individual boxes, wishing to God we had some time and energy to get together. And yet, look at us here. We, those of us who are on disability or have some of these issues, our lives have been destroyed in some way. But at the same time, we have a resource that few people in society have. We have time. We have more time than most people. And I suggest we also have memory. Let us remember what we once had that was lost. We may see that some of the things that John was talking about carried through and have become worse, but that doesn't change the fact that we once had things better than they are now. And we need to remember that and make that clear to current day society. We have not forgotten what you have stolen from us. We have not forgotten what you have stolen from our children. How is it that her children and my children can't attend a higher education without going into debt for the rest of their lives? Why is it that my daughter has a daughter, she has to pay more for student debt in order to get a degree, which she's being told she must do, right? If you want to get anywhere, get a degree. So she goes and does all the right things, now she owes $80,000. Why does she owe more? Because she has a child to raise, so her costs were higher. So now her debt's higher. Well, she has a child to raise. I'm sorry, that's actually illegal under the Constitution. Well, here's the thing. We have been convinced over and over by the way we're treated that we don't have a right to fight back and speak up. Well, I'm here to tell you we have more than just a right. We have a duty to do so. Now, they want to frighten us. Poor bashing comes with a nice little side dish of fear, right? Especially under things like C-51. They say, oh my gosh, they can just, accuse anybody of anything and do anything to you. Not if we stick together. Not if there's enough of us. They can't arrest everybody. And they certainly can't get away publicly with arresting people who are vulnerable, disabled, and who are merely demanding their basic human rights. If we use that language, Canada has had the temerity to sign all these human rights treaties and go out there and tell the whole world that that's what we're all about. We have to be brave enough to say, that's a load of crap. Those right things were signed, but they've never lived up to it. But we, at the same time, don't throw those rights in the garbage. Claim them, reclaim them. As your own pamphlet said, that is basic. One of the things I know as a single parent who was poor bashed to death, and as a woman of color who was poor bashed to death, was that when I discovered my human rights and I read those treaties and those laws, I'm like, hell yeah. That gave me a lot of power inside, right? To say, I don't have to be afraid of you. I don't have to bow down to you. When we elect you, you are actually bound by international law. Your first duty as an elected official is to respect, uphold, protect my human rights. That's what their job is. They may not know it. They may not have been told that when they were going through the process. But we, their employers, the people who elect them, must remember to tell them that. This is your job. I'm not here to ask you for a favor. I am here to demand the rights that we all deserve. And I'm not just here to demand rights just for me, or my little bunch, or my little community, or my little race group, or whatever. I'm here to demand that everybody have these rights. And by the way, if that means changing the whole system, scrapping all these little social benefit programs where they spend all the money on policing us to death, on poor bashing us to death, what if they amalgamated all that money and did a basic income for everybody? We can't afford it. People say, oh, that's too far, it's too complicated, it's too much. I don't think so. Because at this point, if you look at it logically, for 5 minutes, under the conditions of climate change, a broken economy, a broken banking system, a broken, labor system, all broken, what choice do we have if everything's going to change? If people are going to be able to change jobs from the oil sands to renewable energy, if they're going to change jobs from abusive social service jobs to being part of community building, if they're going to change jobs from making toxic chemical products that break down in 5 minutes to doing something proper and renewable, we're going to have a basic income. So we now have a new argument, by the way, and this is something that I think about a lot because I have children and grandchildren, and that is climate change. Climate change is real, climate change is upon us, and trust me folks, we're going to all be in a panic. We're all going to be food insecure. We're all going to be struggling within no time. And by the way, I live in a very diverse community where new Canadians are constantly coming in. And you want to know the main thing that's driving them to our country now? Climate change. What's behind the Middle East, Syria, and everything else? Climate change. Those people have no land to till for food anymore. So everything is getting really bad in the rest of the world, and we're in one of the luckiest places, and one of the safest and most stable places. So now when we fight for justice and economic justice, now when we fight for change, this is a moment where we have to take steps further, where we actually finally can say the capitalist system is broken, it has to be changed, completely changed. The kinds of things that John's been saying for decades is now so abundantly obvious that basically you have to be really stupid or really scared to deny it. If we, however, just fight it by saying we don't like it and we don't have demands to go with the fight, people are just going to feel worse and more scared, right? But if we have some answers, like basic incomes, like everybody should have basic kind of human rights, like they need to invest in new industries, renewable energy, whatever. Our young people should be educated how to build sustainable, resilient communities that they can survive increases in temperature, extreme weather, droughts, lack of crops, all these things. If our children aren't being educated to survive this, what the hell is the education system for? So we need to make some new demands, some old demands as well. And I think one of the things is public money in public hands. Take back the public bank, and there's actually a legal case going to the court system right now trying to do that. Now, if we let that happen in the dark, they'll kill it. But if we get louder and louder about it, and we demand public money in public hands, our taxes should be spent on our well-being, not on paying interest to a bank. Right? That's usury, it's evil, and it's got to stop. But now is a good time for us to expose all that, right? And if we say a basic income will allow us to transition our economy to something more sustainable, and those of us who are poor can tell you what it takes in order for us to have a decent basic income. And it ain't what we got today, right? So, we have time, we have experience, we have a justifiable, real, credible voice. It's a really important and a very good time to use it. But we also have a duty because young people, our children, my grandchildren that are coming up after us may actually become extinct if these maniacs continue to run things the way they do. When Occupy came out, one thing they did that was really, really powerful and important for everybody was to remind us that there is 1% or less that is running this agenda. And it's getting smaller and smaller, and their credibility is gone. So now is our time, the 99%. And we may be at the bottom of the 99%, but we in some ways have so much to offer the rest of the 99%. Because we have more time, and we've already been poor bashed, so we ain't scared of that. We can stand up and speak out in a way that people whose mortgages and jobs and everything else keep hanging over their heads, they can't. We can. So I suggest that we can work together between Hamilton, Toronto, different cities, start start building the movement up again as we have in the past. And believe me, we've had victories. They will try to wipe history from our memories and pretend we never won anything. We have, and we can do it again. And now's the time.
Not really understood very well by the general public. And we're going to have a question and answer session, as well as a chance for people to tell their own stories. And I think we can mix them together. And what time, by the way? What time was the break? This is Josie DeRico, one of our founders, by the way, a woman that I call the Venerable Josie. You could never find a kinder, more decent woman if you looked around the world.
Everybody working together, just being great says it, and everybody working together. It's not going to happen if we fight amongst each other, right? We have to get together no matter what. Anyways.
Then my question, Josie, was what time are we having to break? Because we have snacks and things back there.
We want to continue another half hour of discussion.
Okay, one more half hour.
And break it open to you chit-chatting with each other and the food and the time. So at least another half hour of discussion.
And if I may make use of my, let me, no selfish of me, let me thank all of the speakers. They were all wonderful people. They've come from Toronto. And it's great. Great. Thank you guys so much. I wanted to point out, by the way, that the people that run the 1% of the 1%, or maybe the 1% of that, they know that we're headed for a disaster, an apocalypse. They are already, according to documentaries that I've seen and what I've read, they're already preparing their escape routes. They're buying up land in New Zealand, they're fortifying their homes, they're arming their yachts. They know that something is going to happen. When it does, they'll be okay. They'll be just fine. The rest of us, and those who are poor, are going to suffer the most. All right, can someone keep kind of a, I don't know who had their hand up first. Okay.
Go from one side of the room to the other.
Margie, our member, yes.
Miss Grace, what do you think of university and college students encouraged to apply for credit cards once they then backed out?
I think it's a sin.
This causes that downward spiral into being in debt, which starts some of them onto the path of being poor. Our daughter got caught in that trap. She owns an OSAP loan, and she lost her horse.
Well, I think all youth who have been forced into that situation, hopefully, if they would, should band together and class action lawsuit. Because it's a sin. It's a crime must be done. Our bank president is sitting on the make these formulas, make these things happen so that they can get more and more and more of their population into debt. When I speak in university, I'm very frequently approached by young people who say, I would love to do this kind of work or that kind of work, but I can't use my degree because I'm going to have to work for a corporation or a bank just so I can pay back the debt. So this is how debt slavery works, and this is where they got me. So this is why we need to not talk about reducing tuition, but eliminating
quite frankly, we're a small group, limited resources. 3 people at once is about all we can handle. But if you join the group and come frequently, you will meet the bureaucrats, the OW bosses, the politicians. We do a lot of work in that regard. All right, and I have no idea who's next.
The sister over here, Lee's sister over here,
Okay. Who was it? Jane?
over here.
Oh, here, Rhonda.
I just want to congratulate the team. Very well spoken. The last speaker, I appreciate, very powerful. I am in that same situation actually. I had 2 good jobs, making X amount of money, almost $70,000 a year. Got sick, and here I am today. I have to rely on the system. One thing that I learned from it though, that judging, you should not judge a person. Because before I was working, I have a different aspect of life. But now that my 2 feet are in, I see a different outlook, and I can relate to different stories. Well, job, I think a good job. The question that I have to ask anyway, what was the name of the bank that you were spoken about?
Bank of Canada.
Bank of Canada.
Still got it. It's just you don't use it that way.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, this, to me, I only heard about this a few years back. Working a night shift as a security guard, I started tuning into conspiracy radio, which beats the mainstream media hands down, by the way, for insight. And they talked about the Bank of Canada. It's owned by the government, and it was the bank that government agencies went to until 1974 for non-profit loans, or non-interest, for interest-free loans to build infrastructure and so on, until that function was outsourced to private bankers. We now have a debt in Canada of about $700 billion, and yet since 1974, we pay $1.1 trillion in interest to the private bankers. But 1.1 trillion paid, still 700 billion. We haven't even touched the principal yet. It's a scam. It's hard to wrap your mind around it. Almost nobody knows about it. There is a court case challenging it right now, but it virtually never gets covered in the mainstream media. Virtually never. But I do advise everybody to look into that.
What
Okay.
about all the addicts in the cities? That's what the problem is. The government can't call the addicts to be addicts.
Let's not bash our own people.
No, I am one of these people.
No, wait a minute, Jane.
I am one of these people. I am on disability.
She's talking about the
I see
government.
people doing needles in the urban core, and the urban core is just letting it happen.
Yeah.
Why are they letting it happen?
That's right.
Why? They got fucking needles in there killing themselves, and they're just letting it happen. And saying you care about the community? No, you don't.
Where's the cat?
Giving people that you have people on you should be getting them off the
Oh, okay,
not
all
letting
right.
them take care of it.
Well, I can see that you have a
She had a whole
very,
box of needles sitting there, and I told her not to do it. They're
I see
they're
that you have a very
killing
strong
themselves. Why
point
did
of
that
view.
happen? Why is it report
Let
that
her
happen?
speak.
What?
You're gonna find her dead there, it's okay. We'll pay for the addicts.
Yeah. What about the back alleys too?
Yeah, what about that?
What about the East End?
Okay, everybody calm down, please. There's a lot of emotions here that don't need to be right or wrong. Jane, yes, what is your question? Please don't leave us.
I have an appointment with my own
Okay, go ahead.
caseworker. So if you don't mind, I'd like to bring order to the meeting, and let's be respectful to each other.
Okay.
And let's raise our hand and then ask the question.
Jane, go ahead.
Thank you. I would like to address the fact that this city claims that it's doing a lot to the poor on behalf of our children, the best place to raise children. I believe this is a catch-22 because we only get charity for children.
What about people do needles? That's good for the children, pick up needles.
Okay.
Have you heard her say yet?
Please,
Not
order,
about the
please.
children.
Don't argue
They're
there.
about the children.
Order,
Let her
please.
speak. We'll speak to you guys.
Go ahead. I feel like a judge.
I'm trying to make the point that we're buying And that is another way to keep us down and not expect anything for the broader population of the poor. Don't buy into it. It's time to realize that programs should be for everybody, that food banks should be for everybody, that food donations should be for everybody. And when I see newspaper ads supported by government departments and officials that say, we're raising food for the children, they are saying only the children are valued now and into the future. How dare they? And we are buying into that because we think that is just fine.
Thank you, Jane. That's very true. Oh, Jeff?
Okay, I'm talking about the food bank. You say that food bank is someone can get food or something. The first time I went there, it was even long. You know, I didn't really have to go early to get something. You have to go early to get the nice food because finish when it gets your time. So I went there, I was taking some like fresh food or something, but they can. That food. I couldn't really wanted that food because I think it can kill me, I think. So I told them, I can't eat this food. Is this food? Of course, that's food. But how can I eat it? You have to open the can and then try to do something. Or wash it or do whatever you want. I said, oh my God, I can't eat that food. I refused. I left. They called me back. They had nice food. They gave me nice food. But why did they hide that food then? If they would have to give to people. And then all the other people say, hey, we want that food too. No, you have been taking this food for long. So why are you trying to say that you want that food too? So they gave me one, but when I went back, they gave me again the can, and they said, I can't take it there. But last time you gave me nice food, they said, this time you can't. So I gave up. So, and then they give those cans, they already expired. Have to read the date of expiration. But they want to kill us then. How? So please.
Let me answer that question.
Thank you, well, yeah.
Big answer. The food banks can only give what's been donated to them. There you go. There's your answer.
Yeah, and a lot of the food that's donated is garbage and no one wants it.
Can I make a point about that food bank issue?
Oh, go ahead, please.
It's not just what's donated to them by individuals. Corporations have managed to manipulate the situation so that it becomes cheaper for them to offload their expired food into a food bank than into the landfill. So it actually benefits corporations to have food banks rather than have people have adequate incomes to buy things in their store. They like to have both. People who will buy expensive food in their store and people who will use up and make them look good for giving expired food to people and make them saving money. And there's actually also a law that holds the corporations immune if anyone gets food poisoning. So there's a lot of problems with food banks, but there are alternative ways to do that kind of food distribution, like the guy who created the card system, where you don't have to lose your dignity because everybody uses a card now. It just happens to be a card. So rather than donate food, people in that community donate money, people use the card, they go to the grocery store like everybody else, they pick what they need to eat. And I hear you, sister, and I hear all of you, because I also went to the food bank, and I couldn't eat it because I'm chemically sensitive. And I know this sister over here suffered all her life from that. So, you know, the fact of the matter is that there's nothing even close to meeting a human right to give people food bank food. And by the way, in response to the sister who said about them all talking about children all the time, they play this game many times. That's what they try to do to make themselves look nice. And they act as though children are some kind of unique organism that raise themselves, right? It takes healthy parents. It takes healthy families. It takes a healthy community to raise children, right? Even healthy grandparents. So they kind of want to throw that at you. Don't necessarily say we don't want to feed the children. Say the grandparents and the parents need to be there for the children. They need that as much as they need healthy food.
And let's stop these ads, because they're expensive
Okay,
and
thank
money
you.
is spent.
shout, we won't be able to meet here again. And we've been meeting here for years. I think rather than, direct your question to the panel that was here for, I'm just grandstanding. Don't want to hear the voice. Who was next? Does anybody know?
Over here has had his hand up.
Oh, all right, go ahead.
Brother, live long and prosper.
Yeah.
You have something to say?
Yeah, I do. I'd like to direct it to Colette, please. Okay, you mentioned something that, and I said, what was in passing called a living wage? Okay, I think that, as far as I'm concerned, I think that would be an impossibility. The reason I say that is that if you try to force a company to give a living wage, say $15 or $16 an hour, you would drive small business out of existence, or they would end up putting a lot more people on the welfare line because they would not be able to afford it.
Not true.
It would be a very hard thing for them to afford.
Okay, thank you, Terry. We'll ask the panel what they do.
Well, first of all, can I just answer that? Because this is a very common line. They've been using this a long time. They will ruin all business if business has to pay their workers. What they're forgetting is businesses are closing because nobody can afford to shop there because they only have enough money to go to Walmart, all right? So if you pay people properly, you have customers who can afford their services. This is what I'm saying. It's a logical argument that the more people money people have, the healthier businesses are. And just a good example, when they cut welfare back in the day, 1998, 96, the 21% decrease, we lost over $1 million a month in the riding where I live, and businesses started falling like dominoes because people could not shop there. So when they say that, when they say we can't pay people a living wage, then you come back with the point, who's going to buy stuff from anybody if nobody has a living wage? If everybody's poor, who in the end is going to make any business operate? They need customers, therefore they need workers.
Also, they need people that don't take 2 and 3 part-time jobs to try to make up and then don't have time to spend with their families to do anything because you're working us. There was a time when I had 5 part-time jobs. Oh, just trying to make ends meet so that I was like, okay, I've tried this thing, it's not working. But a living wage would go a long way to help people actually just have 1 job so they can make ends meet.
Just before I get a little bit rebuttal on that, in the fact that when you have a living wage, you bring it up to people that are making money now, up to a living wage, that does not cause another domino effect within the company itself for other people to want to increase their salaries even higher. So it puts a big burden on the customer.
Working at minimum wage right now.
Yeah, and you brought them up to a living wage, to those that are at that living wage, would want to go higher, that they would not find it fair.
Well, what's wrong with that, Terry?
What's wrong with that is you need more money coming out of their pocket.
It's just establishing a base for companies to say, anyone that we employ, their minimum is a living wage.
Okay, okay.
If you're making $30 an hour, then you're good.
I'm feeling utterly inadequate up here. I read once that poverty is the distinction between shopping at Target and shopping at Walmart. And I'd like to take people who are not in our group with questions first. So this lady in the back, you had your hand up forever. You want to come up and speak?
Good afternoon, everybody. You need to know my name and what it is. The reason I'm here is to do. Good afternoon, everybody. I need to know everybody. What I had is a good food block program. It did for families, it did for children. I want you to hand it. What are the good food block program? Great. You let us pay for, and even in your privileges, it's either $30 over it, but environmental agency, and they pick it up once a month, and it is good, fresh food for the family. It's not just children, it's adults, it's for kids, it's for grandparents, and enough. And they bring good, fresh food to your environmental agency also. Find out where the bank.
And what's your name?
Yeah.
Janice, well, thank you for coming up. People that don't know about the Good Food Box, there is a program. You get your fresh food once a month. You can eat for 3 or 4 days and hold it in for the rest of the time. Yes, sir.
I would love to I'm in the community to share the tribes of Africans so we can all share and have good jobs and not have to choose one tribe. It'd be nice if we can all get jobs and work and pay our bills. It'd be worth it of living.
Absolutely. It didn't talk about it today. Let's get together and feel all right. We need to be united in this because we're speak with so many voices. Does the panel have anything to say?
I do about that. Racism in my brother is another way in which corporate elite constructs the system. And it's not even as simple as preventing black people from getting work that's decent. They let a few through. But another thing that a lot of us know, especially now, is that with the prison industrial complex that has been building up in the United States and also attempting to build up here, one of the reasons for that prison industrial complex is that they lure or they trap people into that prison system and then they use them as youth labor. And black people are the main target of that. So what it really is bringing slavery back in a new form. And I just thought I should let you know that Harper's wife owns a commissary company that sells goods to prisoners. So that's why they want those super prisons and those private prisons to get built and built and built. Because it's using public money for private profit. And that's something you all got to watch out for. Anytime they say, oh, we privatize the service, it will be more efficient. Yeah, it'll be more efficient and making money for rich people and then exploiting poor people. That's what that's all about. Anytime they say privatize anything, it's ripping off public money for private profit, and never forget it. And black people are at the heart of that.
All right, now we're going to have a break in a few minutes. I appreciate it if people would just stay still and listen to the questions. Respect your fellow hops. That's the word has it down. Gord, yes, go ahead. This is Gord. He has a show on CFMU radio, and he deals with poverty issues a lot. Yes, go ahead, Gord.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, and it's something you were mentioning too about food. I want to go back to that for a minute. Past couple of shows actually, I've had people on talking about food and food issues, among other things. I had some people on from McQuestion, had them on from other places as well. And one of the things they are working on, and it's something that sounds very good to me, I'd like to get your feedback on it, all of you really, is the whole business of getting involved with these community gardens and using what comes out of them for our own purposes, if you like, for ourselves, and to get away from total reliance, anyway, on, first of all, the corporate donations, which, as you say, is a bit of a scam, to say the least, and also to get away even from just what David was talking about, some junk food that gets sent in. The other thing is, too, and a number of these organizations are well aware, and they are asking for donations of food that is not necessarily what we ourselves may want. Bulk food, legumes, beans, this type of thing, herbs, and things of that nature, what we might term ethnic foods, that people in their neighborhoods and people who come there can get much more out of. For example, rice as opposed to potatoes and